Welcome everyone to another episode of Wicked Problems. We're continuing our series on the EV ecosystem, and I'm joined today by Matthew Lumsden, the CEO of Connected Energy. Matthew's worked in the energy sector since 2000, first as the managing director of TNEI, a renewables consulting firm, and then as a founder setting up the Future Transport Systems in 2010, a company that ran some of the very first EV trials and EV charge point infrastructure rollouts. Connected Energy was set up in 2013 following an idea that came out of one of the charge point projects Matthew and his team were running in the east of England. They wanted to install charge points at the Lotus site, but realized that power capacity on the site actually was a barrier. The idea of battery energy storage to overcome the capacity constraints then came to them. And by using second life batteries, that is batteries that had finished their use in an EV, that then came to them and solved the issue of what to do with EV batteries at the end of their life in a vehicle, because EV batteries, once they're finished with an EV, they've actually got a lot of capacity and a lot of life left in them. The company has had a long-standing relationship with Renault and, in fact, developed over the last 8 years, because Renault was very early to market with EVs. And so we're in a position to have second life batteries that they could provide earlier in the process. In 2023, Connected Energy gained major investment from a number of strategic investors, including Volvo Energy, Caterpillar and Engie. We go into the episode talking about all sorts of things. Where did the idea come from? How have they fared in the market? How do they get their batteries? How do they make sure that the batteries are the right quality? And what happens when they've finished using the batteries? It's a fascinating episode, as always. So again, as always, I hope you enjoy it a lot. Welcome, Matthew, to Wicked Problems. It's wonderful to have you here and to hear about Connected Energy. I'm really looking forward to it.
Hi, Toby. Thanks for the invitation, and always happy to talk about our baby. So, looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Tell me a bit about, and tell our viewers and listeners about Connected Energy, what it is that you do, where you fit in the ecosystem.
Okay, so we develop energy storage systems that use second life electric vehicle batteries. So obviously, as you use your electric vehicle, as you drive and as you charge, the batteries gradually degrade, and they get to a point where that level of degradation starts to impinge on obviously the range of the journeys you can undertake between charging. So there comes to a point where they become impractical, which is typically something like 20% degraded, 25% degraded. And then when they hit that point, we take them and we build them into stationary energy storage systems, which we then plug into the grid. We always work with packs. So we take the pack exactly as it is, as it was manufactured, as it was designed by the OEM. So we capitalize all those safety systems and control systems that they've invested in. And, our core IP, if you like, is a master controller that sits on top of all of those packs and enables them to be operated as one system. And clearly, they've all come from different vehicles. They've all been used in slightly different ways. They're all at slightly different levels of degradation. So, the key part of our IP is how do you control all of those packs that are slightly different in such a way as they work together to provide the amount of power and energy that's called upon from one of our systems.
So that's got to be quite a challenge, because the different manufacturers do, in fact, have quite different battery technologies.
Yeah. So, the way we have designed our core IP, our core control system, is that we can interface with different types of batteries. So long as the OEM will collaborate with us and provide the necessary communication data, then we can use their batteries. From a design and a cost perspective, we will typically include just one type of battery within any particular container. So our systems are containerized. But all batteries obviously have different form factors, they have different connections, they have different cooling systems. So we'll typically have one container with one type of battery in it, but then those containers can be combined so that ultimately we can have an array of containers that might have Renault, Volvo, 4C Power, a range of different types of batteries within them. So that gives us some sort of key flexibility, particularly at this early time in the market where there are relatively small volumes of different types of batteries available. There aren't vast amounts of one type of battery, so that flexibility really enables us to scale up the business.
And what are the applications that these second life batteries get put towards?
The systems we've been selling for the last few years are quite small, so they're a 20-foot container with about 360 kilowatt hours of capacity in them, and we've been selling those onto industrial and commercial sites with a range of different applications. So you can use our systems to do anything that you would expect a normal first life energy storage system to do, and that is typically, so one application is around EV charging. So we all know that there's a constraint around building out charging infrastructure because of the grid connections. As well as pulling power from the grid, you can also pull power from the storage system, which gives you access to more capacity to connect more chargers up. And also, we have projects where people are linking that charging hub into on-site PV. So it enables you to decarbonize, obviously, the electricity that's going into those EVs. Then really the other typical application is around helping to optimize an energy system. So, and that might be either potentially to manage the peak load, but also to potentially decarbonize or reduce the operating costs. So we've got a number of systems on buildings where they've got PV, or we've got some that have also got ground source heat. They might have EV chargers as well, and you'll have a building management system, and you can link into our e-store system to control the power from that system to either charge or discharge to help optimize that overall system. And I suppose there's a final piece of the jigsaw, which is, you can provide services to the grid to help them balance the disparity between the overall load and the renewable generation. Obviously, renewable generation is typically non-dispatchable. You can't control it. So combining that with storage gives you an increased amount of control, and it gives you an ability to better balance that load with the renewable generation. So quite a few people have got our systems installed, and they are paid by National Grid to charge and discharge to help that balancing exercise.
And that enables the grid to also be balanced in the more sort of general sense.
Exactly. So typically, large energy storage systems that are installed at the moment are generating their revenue, building their business case around either trading energy, so you charge cheap and you sell when it's more expensive, and combining that with providing flexibility services to the grid that help the grid balance itself.
So this means that one of your systems going in isn't just a cost center, it's also potentially a profit center. Well, it's got potential to feed money back into the business as well.
Very much. So, everybody looks at the business case for a storage system. One of the challenges with energy storage is the business case changes quite a lot. Typically, it has to stack up commercially from a revenue perspective unless it's solving a problem. And, typically if people have got, situation like charging infrastructure, or if somebody's trying to include a new piece of equipment on their site, which might have a particular peak load that can't be facilitated by the connection capacity, then you can use a storage system to peak shave that load, which can be a lot quicker and cheaper than upgrading your connection. So storage is an alternative to that.
Do your systems also enable, for example, where people are in maybe in a less well-connected location, i.e. it's more difficult to upgrade the capacity at that location, presumably they can use sort of battery systems that you're providing to enable to take a trickle charge, if I can put it that way, and then that storage system enables actually a higher DC charge to the vehicle than would be available if you were just connected to the grid.
Exactly. And, obviously, if you think of something like an EV charging hub, then you might have periods where it's not being used at all. You'll have perhaps an average level of charging, and then from time to time you get a peak where everybody's charging their vehicles, and at those peak times, you might not have connection capacity that can facilitate that. And it's that kind of instance where storage can be very handy in just doing that peak shaving exercise.
And because utilization actually at some sites fluctuates quite wildly and could be quite low for at times. So yes, that would be, I can see exactly where that's coming in. You get your batteries from manufacturers. How do they know when to give you their battery? Like, what's the percentage state of charge that the battery is now holding that they say, actually, we're prepared to give this battery up now?
Yeah, so it's quite a varied model. From a safety perspective and from a scalability perspective, we work directly with the OEMs, or we work with organisations that are financing fleets. And in the instance of, say, a bus fleet, then quite often the operator or the owner of the bus fleet will swap the batteries when they get to the end of the warranty. They might extend the warranty slightly, but typically, a bus warranty is quite often 8 years. They might swap the batteries at 8 years or a couple of years after that. And obviously, particularly in the case of commercial vehicles, then the range is really critical. If the vehicle can't deliver that range, then it sort of screws up the routes that the bus can operate on, or the routes that the trucks are doing. So typically we'll get those batteries after about 8 years, and those will be round about 20% degraded. but it ranges a lot. I mean, some have very little levels of degradation, and some are more degraded. We typically don't take anything that's more than 25% degraded. So that is one of the strengths of being able to pull batteries from sort of bus and truck fleets and commercial vehicle fleets, because there's a good level of utilization, so the batteries degrade, but also they have a good level of data attached to them, so we know how the batteries have been used, and we really know what we're getting. Then there's another route where some of the car manufacturers are pulling batteries together. They will then potentially do testing on the batteries, and then we will pull them through, and that leads to a much greater level of degradation. But as I said, our systems are able to mix batteries and utilize them according to their states of health. It's really important to be able to work closely with the OEMs and people who are financing fleets, so that we're able to build a business based on a predicted flow. If you're pulling batteries from all sorts of random places, then it's really difficult to scale up the business from that.
So you're not pulling them from random places, though. You've got specific agreements with different OEMs, and then you go through a sort of QA process with each battery, so you know what you're getting, and then you know how to put it into the mix based on your own parameters, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that probably in the last 18 months or so, we've completely changed our business model, really, in that previously, when we were just delivering these smaller systems, we were treating our customers was very specifically somebody who wanted to buy an energy storage system, whereas now our customer is typically somebody who's got a lot of second life batteries that they want to monetize before they go through to a recycler. So if you imagine that obviously the electric vehicle industry is at a very early stage. There's a lot of competition there coming over from China, and the business case is really important. So if you can attribute a much stronger residual value to the batteries by putting them into second life before they're recycled, then it obviously improves the economics of the sales proposition from the OEM, but then also for the economics of the fleet. So we're now working very closely with OEMs and fleets so that we can help them understand what the prospects are for those batteries, understand what the residual value is, and then we also get the visibility of the battery flow, which means that we know how many batteries we're going to be, or what will be available to us in, say, 2027, and we can then therefore make sure we've got the projects available to take those batteries when they do become available. So the industry is really starting to change and recognise the problems that potentially second life batteries present if you don't utilise them. So if you don't utilise them, you lose competitive advantage. But then also, if you do utilise them, you've got to put together quite a good value chain together to enable that to happen.
So this model really helps the business case for the OEMs, for the Renaults, for the Volvos of this world when they're making EVs. So that whole EV life cycle, if you will, it helps them with the monetization of that in ways that they wouldn't have been able to do perhaps with an ICE engine.
Yeah, and it does exactly that. So it improves the business case for the vehicle, but then also if we come back to the application, then obviously, if people are starting to build out fleets of trucks, say, or big bus charging hubs, then you come back to the problem we discussed earlier, which is around this constraint around the grid. So if you can enable your customer to operate a fleet of electric trucks by putting a storage system at that charging hub that uses the storage to increase the available capacity, then it also potentially accelerates your sales process. So, all of this is joining up into part of the overall fleet proposition.
I have to ask a question that just occurs to me and intrigues me slightly, because battery technology is constantly improving. We have, better and better batteries. They go longer and longer. They last longer. Does that have an impact on your business model at all? And if it does, how do you respond to that? What's the use case there?
I mean, it will do. It certainly will do in the future. If you imagine the batteries that we're using now are batteries that have typically been in the field for 7 or 8 years. So we're obviously harnessing the older technology, but even those are, they're coming through after a longer and longer period of time. But even so, we're still seeing a dramatic ramp up. There'll be a dramatic ramp up in second life battery availability between 2026 and 2030. That's when the first phase of the hockey stick starts to happen. And then beyond that, it starts to get up into enormous volumes. And obviously that slope will change according to the rate at which the batteries degrade. But we have that flow locked down in the short term, and it will just impact on the gradual rate of growth of the business, I suppose. But I suppose our view is that there will be such an enormous volume of batteries becoming available that we will just take the cream off the top. There will be huge volumes of hybrid batteries that are small and impractical to reuse. There will be batteries that have no heritage attached to them, so we don't understand what condition they're in. There'll be batteries that are too degraded, etc., etc. So we will just take the cream off the crop, which give us the best business case for the application that we're putting them into.
And presumably, with the rate of adoption of EVs increasing, that has a positive impact on the business case.
Yeah, and it gives us more choice. It creates a bit of additional competition, I suppose, around the battery prices, which means that the price of the second life batteries will gradually fall. So the business case around second life batteries, should get stronger and stronger.
You're a business that is in the cross section of various sectors. So you've got automotive, energy, utilities. You talked about, I say automotive, but that in itself is quite a wide range of different businesses. How's it been to navigate through that cross section of different? Because I ask because sometimes when you're dealing with multiple different industries, really, it can be a challenge to navigate that.
Yeah, top tip is don't try it. So it's been very, very challenging. I think a good rule in business is boldly go where someone's gone before, and we kind of ignored that rule. And I guess we also got into this space quite early, so we've been at it about 10 years. And as you say, I mean, these are enormous businesses in enormous sectors that are slow to change, heavily regulated, etc., etc. And our business is very dependent or entirely dependent on getting our strategy right, and ultimately these two sectors agreeing that what we're doing makes sense, which, is starting to happen now. But, what we've learned is that, one of the problems is obviously the automotive sector is going through enormous changes anyway, so they've already got enough on their plates without having to worry about second life batteries. So that was relatively low on their list of priorities up until quite recently. There's a big cultural difference between the automotive sector and the energy sector. The energy sector is very project driven. The automotive sector is very process driven, so it has very different time horizons, has very leaner margins, much less keen on experimenting with things. We hit lucky in that we contacted Renault in the very early days, and Renault were leasing their batteries. So it meant they had control and visibility on the batteries. So we were able to, really start quite early on a scalable model with a visible battery flow. So that was fantastically, and it was nothing more than luck. We contacted a load of people, and Renault joined forces with us. So that was really good, and we've really focused a lot in the last 2 years on aligning that value chain so that it works for both the energy sector and the automotive sector. And I think we're starting to get to a point now where we've certainly got we've got battery OEMs, EV OEMs, players in the energy sector. We've got people who are prepared to finance projects using second life batteries, and we've got people who are prepared to put warranties on second life batteries. So we've now got all of those pieces of the jigsaw lined up. We've had our smaller systems operating in the field for 6 or 7 years now, so the generic technology is all proven. So we've pretty much got all of our ducks in a row now for scaling up. This year we'll be installing our first a 3 megawatt module, which will then be a module in much, much bigger systems. So the next thing is dealing with the challenge from the energy sector, which is that actually it takes quite a long time. So you're looking at probably at least a couple of years to originate a large scale energy storage project. So we have to somehow bridge batteries coming out of vehicles with projects and ensure that we get the timing right so that we've developed the project, we've got the site ready, we've got the technology ready to take the batteries out of the buses or whatever and put them in the containers and put them on the project and start operating. And I think we've just got to that point now where everybody's understanding that model and starting to align so that we can build that full process and put that in place. And that then becomes very scalable.
So for you, that's a supply chain challenge, I suppose.
Yeah. As you know, in terms of the EV sector, and in terms of the energy sector, in terms of the reuse sector, all of this it's all going through a phase of evolution. So you're dealing with a lot of unknowns, and you've just got to hope that your hypothesis works out, which so far it's worked reasonably well.
Test and learn, I suppose, would be a good motto for that.
I mean, we've been lucky in that we went out and raised, with purpose, investment from strategic investors. So, around our boardroom, we have Caterpillar, Volvo, and Hinduja actually, who potentially are sources of batteries. So, they're on the upstream side, and then we have ENGIE as a utility, and then we have Macquarie and Mercuria and Sumitomo, who have interests in financing projects and have interests in the recycling side as well. So we've got good contacts within our key stakeholders along that full value chain.
Speaking of the business, you mentioned earlier that you boldly went where people hadn't gone before. Back in, I think you said 2013, is when it started. What was the genesis for the idea for the business? What sparked the desire to take that leap?
So my previous business was a renewables consultancy, and we did a lot of work on grid connections, and we also did, at that point. So we sold that in 2010, and people were talking about smart grids, but weren't quite sure exactly what a smart grid, what that term meant. And people were also looking at energy storage, and that was very, very early days, and there was probably no energy storage deployed, more or less, but it was all sort of very salient to the way we were thinking about growing that business. And then just before we sold that business, I got involved with the regional development agency in the Northeast on the sort of inward investment strategy for Nissan to help them build the Leaf plant and obviously AESC, ultimately the battery plant and stuff. So I got involved in running the fleet trials and the infrastructure trials in the Northeast. And what became apparent was that grid connections, even then, it was evident that grid connections were going to be a problem at some point for charging infrastructure. And we were also thinking, well, batteries degrade, et cetera, et cetera. So we sort of explored that. We also did some work with a few of the DNOs on vehicle to grid and the potential for vehicle to grid. So we had two options there, and I was keen to build a technology business. Vehicle to grid felt challenging from a regulatory perspective. Didn't really play to the strengths we had in the business. And Second Life just felt quite interesting. So we did a lot of work on that. We kicked off the first proof of concept project through a government-funded contract. It was called the Large-Scale Energy Storage Demonstrator Project. And, we proved that we could do it, and then we went on from there to scale it up. But fundamentally, that came from trying to install a charge point. That was actually a Lotus site. They wanted a rapid charger installed, and we couldn't install it where we wanted to because we couldn't get the connection capacity. And to do that was expensive and slow. So, okay, maybe you can put some energy storage in there. Maybe you can use Second Life batteries for that. And, that was the genesis of the idea, I guess.
What's your current geographical reach? So are you just UK, or are you all of UK, or do you also dip your toes into other areas?
So, at the moment, we've got systems obviously installed in the UK, but also Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, and Sweden. We've actually just recruited somebody who's now operating out of France. So we will be installing probably the majority of kit outside the UK in Europe over the next few years. But also we've set up a project development division, which is about dealing with the challenge that I mentioned earlier, in that if you're contracting with somebody to provide you with a flow of batteries, you've got to make sure you've got the projects to take them. So we're now originating those projects. So we're originating some in the UK, some in France, and we'll probably look at Germany as well fairly shortly. So really the focus is on markets where, firstly, batteries are going to become available, but secondly, where there's a buoyant market for energy storage. So, we're sharing our risk by looking at a few different markets, because the revenues in energy storage vary, and also, the distribution of the available batteries will also vary. So, very much focusing on Europe at the moment, but then we're also having conversations with people in outside Europe.
Excellent. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
It sounds fascinating. Do you have a favourite fact about Second Life batteries that you could share with people?
I suppose the favourite fact is the raison d'etre behind the business, which is, the world is, we have diminishing resources, we have finite resources. A lot of the resources that go into battery production have a significant environmental impact. If we put a battery into a Second Life, then we can probably at least increase the life of that battery by 50%. potentially more than that, potentially 100%. So, what we're doing is extracting so much more value from those batteries before they go into recycling, that should have a pretty material impact. When you think of the volume of batteries, should have a pretty material impact on the whole sector, should add to the sustainability of the sector. And I think another thing that's, I think, interesting and kind of gets back to one of the questions you raised earlier is that we all talk about, or some of us talk about the circular economy. The hardest part of the circular economy is the reuse piece, because you're using something for a purpose that it wasn't originally designed for. So that unless you design for reuse, then you're dealing with compromises. So I think, the exciting thing about our business is we are helping evolve the thinking around the circular economy, and we're also getting a lot more value from those resources that are already embedded in the battery at the first phase of production, which makes it all feel slightly worthwhile, I guess.
That can only be a good thing and a good feeling, I imagine. If people want to learn more, where do they go? Is it connectedenergy.com? Is it, are there other resources that they can look at that you would recommend?
Certainly look at our website, connected-energy.com or .co.uk, sorry. I'm going to get trouble with my marketing person there. But then also, it's very much an emerging industry. So there aren't really very sort of centralized sources of information. But certainly if people are interested in talking about second life batteries, interested in exploring as an opportunity for them, then get in touch. We'd be very interested in having a conversation with them.
Unfortunately, as so often happens with these conversations, they become really fun and interesting. And then I'm afraid the time sort of gets gobbled up very quickly, much faster than you think it's going to. And we are now just coming to the end of our time together, which is a real shame, because I'm sure we could explore much further and deeper, and maybe we'll get a chance to do that at some future opportunity, and maybe we can
That would be good. It'd be good to catch up again when we've taken the business on to the next phase.
Please, that would be amazing. Matthew, thank you so much for your time. Best of luck.
Likewise, thanks for the invitation, and good fun to talk to you.